Copyright the University of Auckland. All rights reserved. The content and delivery of lectures in this course are protected by copyright. Material belonging to others may have been used in these lectures and copied by and solely for the educational purposes of the university under licence. You may record the lectures for the purposes of private study or research, but you may not upload onto any third-party site, make a further copy, or sell, alter, or further reproduce or distribute any part of these lectures to any other person. Failure to comply with the terms of this warning may expose you to legal action for copyright infringement by the copyright owner and/or disciplinary action by the university.
So, wait until you've heard me, eh? Kia ora. Thank you for inviting me along to have a chat with you today. First of all, a little bit about myself. I'll put my hand up. I'm not a structural engineer, but I've been project managing and in the PMO space for the last 40 years. Very process driven, understanding international standards and codes, best building practice, worked in some of the major, largest structures of the world, America, throughout the Middle East, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, heavy oil and gas, nuclear power stations, conventional pulverised fuel, combined cycle. Worked and been in New Zealand now about 16 years, 4 years with the council, and previous to that with NZ Refinery up in Whangarei. So that's a bit about me. What we're going to do tonight is look at the requirements of 5131. So we're going to talk about the scope. We're going to talk about the role of the structural engineer. We're going to look at deliverables and documents that's required to get your consent through not only its, or your application, not only your design rather, not only through the consenting process, but through the inspection and CCC process as well. It doesn't all stop with the design. Timings, and give you an idea of what the council process is looking for. That's the CCC, the inspectors, and the actual people that look at your designs, that consent your designs. So that's what we'll be covering. So I guess the first thing we need to do is understand why we need to do this. So back in 2018, there was a change to the B1 building code. And for the first time, they cited a standard. And it says the fabrication of steel structures shall be in accordance with ASNZ 5131. So that was in April 2018. We didn't get our first structural steel design consent application that mentioned 5131 until the beginning of this year. So it's taken us that long for designers, architects, structural engineers, industry and council, yeah, I'll put my hand up, and council, to be able to understand what this means, how we address it. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly around roles. So what I thought we'd do now is look at and see where it's applicable. So it's a fact that it's applicable. There's absolutely no question. It's cited in the B1 code, section 5.1.5, section 14. So there's absolutely no question. You've got to comply with it. So what has to comply with it? Well, I think what's interesting here is that the standard applies to all types of building, and it applies to even a lintel used in a private house. So if you've got a fabricated lintel holding up a garage, 5131 is applicable. Yep, no question at all. We've been having some debate with people like Kiwi Span, New Zealand sheds, those type of buildings where they've got cold formed purlins and girts and trusses and so on. That's a little bit of a grey area. So we did some work with ASNZ standards, we did some work with SCNZ, with HERA, with Steel Australia, and we did some work with the manufacturers. And we all came to the same conclusion, that The cold formed purlins and girt members and decking designed using ASNZ 460, then it's applicable. So if you're designing a building and it's got cold formed girts or any cold formed type of structural steel, and you've designed it to 4600, then 5131 is applicable. That's the rule of thumb we're taking at the moment. Yep. So no doubt there'll be some questions about that one later on. That seems to be a bit of a difficult one for people to understand, but that's the current approach that Council's taking. Now, you might have noticed that part of the B1 building code, it talks about the construction category. So this is the role of the designers, of the structural engineers. Yeah. You need to look at 5131, you go to Appendix C, and in there are the instructions on how to determine the construction category. Now, the construction category is not an importance level, it's not construction monitoring, it's a separate ID or an identifier, because it tells us what type of documentation is needed. So the structural engineer designer does not need to worry about the documentation. You're designers, you're not welders, you're not fabricators, you're not expected to know, right? But you are expected to know that this building was designed for certain earthquake conditions, for certain stresses. This is what you do. You're the ones with all the knowledge around design. So from that, you use that to determine this cost category and this construction category. So the three factors you look at are the risk to life and consequence of failure. So that gives you an importance factor. Service category, so which reflects the actions to which the structure and its parts are likely to be exposed. And then the fabrication category. Fabrication category is key because in New Zealand we have an organisation called SCNZ, Steel Construction New Zealand. They run a accreditation, a certification for HERA, Heavy Engineering Research Association, which goes and audits the steel fabricators in New Zealand, and depending on their capabilities, their QMS, the type of projects they've done, awards them a construction category, 1, 2, 3, 4, which lines up with the construction category. So if you've got a construction category 3 design, that automatically tells the constructor that they have to get their fabrication done by a construction category 3 fabricator, because we know that they can provide the documentation that's required by table D1 of 5131. Does that make sense? Yep. So as designers, your role kind of stops there. That's you done. Yeah. And then it moves down the project life cycle and goes to the constructor, who then has to go and get a material supplier, a fabricator to put it together, and then someone to put it up. So that's where we move on a little bit more. So, so there's the table for determining it. You notice that all road and rail bridges automatically cost category 4, no question. So when we do the Skylink bridge, footpath bridge, the clip-on, that's automatically class 4, construction category 4, no question. So each construction category demands a different type and level and depth of QMS, quantity management. If I use an abbreviation that people are not quite sure of, please ask. I've got a terrible habit of doing it. I think everybody understands it, and I do apologise. So QMS, Quality Management System. So the D1 table tells you what you need. So a construction category 1, which I suggest would be a simple beam used as a lintel in a garage for a residential property, just requires some delivery documents, some dimensional checks, some non-destructive testing for the welding, 3 bits of paper, so it's not complicated. When you get into the larger complex cruciforms, critical joints, some of the bigger stuff that you would have seen going up in the conference centre, some of the stuff that went up in Commercial Bay, the steelwork that they're using down for the basement of the Seascape Hotel. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to visit that site, but if you can get a chance, it's well worth going there. From an engineering point of view, it's fantastic. The building, the 5-level basement, and they're building it without any rock anchors or D-walls. They're just going up using plates and digging down as they go, and then shoring up. It's quite impressive, the steel they got there. So this determines it. So you've got your 3 factors there. You've got your service category, your fabrication category, and your importance level. So if it's importance level 2, service category is SC 1, and your fabrication category is FC2, then you're going to have a CC2, CC3 rather, building. So that's simple as that. Very easy to use. And use the designers will determine that. So this is a rough list of the quality documentation. So it will be some or all of this. Again, this is taken from 5131. So it will be some or all of it. Yeah. Pretty straightforward again. I don't think there's anything difficult. Not your concern. This is the constructor's concern. As designers and engineers, you've nominated it as CC2, goes to the constructor. They need to make sure that their fabricator and steel supplier can supply the documents. Yep. So then what happens? Well, at this point, the design's done, and then you throw it at council, and you say to council, give me your consent. And council will say no. Yep. Because, or yes, I suspect. So when you get your consent, as you know, it goes to the constructor, and it normally has some kind of conditioning on it. So what we wanted to do from council was try and level the playing field and make it fair and make those conditions reflect the risk. So we're trying to do a bit of risk assessment as opposed to just does it comply? Is it the lowest? One of our challenges is that the building code is the lowest you need to do. Yeah, that's the minimum requirement. What we're doing is we're doing a risk assessment and saying, well, is the minimum actually good enough? Yeah. So what we've come up with is a little set of tables. So it's a risk matrix for determination of construction category alignment with the vice notes. So everything in the green would say, look, this is a very simple building. It's a CC1. Chances of getting it wrong, pretty low. Here's your consent, go and build, but we want the documentation before we'll issue the CCC. Yep. Everything in the amber there was saying, okay, this is kind of middle of the road. There's some unknowns here. We've got a bit of a risk. One of those risks are circular hollow sections. There isn't a steel mill in the world that can make circular hollow sections to ASNZ standards, right? Anything over about 250, 300. Anything under, they can, but anything up about 250, 290, 300, I guarantee you they cannot comply with ASNZ. So what the constructor has, so your design's fine because you've specified it, and you've specified 3404. Now the poor constructor can't buy 3404 circular hollow sections. So they've got a massive problem now. Yeah. So what we do then is we go back and work with them at that stage. So here's your consent, get on with the rest of it. But now take us through, as a constructor, your compliance part. And I think this is where there's been a bit of a disconnect. The constructor's automatically gone back to the designer and said, well, look, council's asked us about 35, I've forgotten it. 5131. Yeah. And we know nothing about it. You're the experts, you're the structural engineers, you're meant to know. Well, of course you're not, because it's not a design attribute. It's not part of a design. It's not a calculation. It's not wind factors. It's not load factors. It's not so anything that you deal with. Yeah, this is what the constructor has to do. So next time a client pushes back, says, oh, "Look, council, why have council asked for 5131?" You can say, well, because it's specified in my specification, because it needs to be, and B, you as the constructor have to comply with it. Yeah, so we will work with them and they'll demonstrate compliance to the circular hose sections and anything else that doesn't comply with New Zealand steel standards or New Zealand standard for steel. And we generally do that around factory production tests, steel mill certificates, inspections, and depending on their QMS and that. So we had a major challenge with the Seascape Hotel. Everything was fabricated, all the steel was manufactured, and all the profiles were fabricated in Southeast Asia. Nothing wrong with the fabrication, nothing wrong with the steel, it just didn't comply to the standard. So we've literally tied our hands. Yeah. So we can't do that. We have to give a commercial equal playing field, so people have to be able to buy it. So legislation tied our hands, right? So what we then do is ask the constructor to demonstrate compliance. They'll come to you in a panic, yeah? Tell them to come and see me or somebody else at the council, and we'll hold their hand and we'll take them through that process. It is not a role for the engineer, for the designer or the engineer. Okay?
Quick question, and I'm wearing a constructor's hat here. Isn't there a responsibility on the designer to ensure that what he has specified is actually available in the market?
No,
you know?
That's a commercial issue, purely commercial.
Well, it's not.
Well, you've just asked me and I just said it was, so you can say no and I can say yes all night. That's not going to get us anywhere, yeah. Right? Okay. Take it up with a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't know, yeah. Right? But I've been in contract for a long, long time, yeah. And in every single contract, yeah, the designer specifies the design, yeah, to a set of standards from the owner or user of the building. So whoever the developer is, right? Yeah. So if it's the developer will set the standards, the designer designs to them, the constructor builds to the design. 3 separate entities. So no, as a developer, I might wish to buy my steel or my product from overseas, but you're forced to design to this standard.
But isn't there still a responsibility on the designer to say, if he, in this case, specifies a steel tube to a New Zealand standard, but no one in the world manufactures a tube of that size to that standard, then that is a design problem.
No, there's other ways of making it comply. There's other ways of demonstrating compliance. Yeah. I'd agree with you, a professional might, but... So how do we... So when that constructor, when he's gone to the fabricator, how does he get those documents? So you'll hear us talk about things like manufacturer's data report. So that's typically steel mill certificates, NDT testing, stuff like that. An inspection and test plan. Inspection and test plan is very often a series of hold points of when inspections are done through the fabrication. So the steel plate will arrive in the fabricator, for example, and their first hold point might be check the heat numbers to make sure that the steel complies with standard. Yeah. And then the last one's normally check the dimensional check of the profile, and the coating check is normally the last one. And depending on how complex or large the project is, there'll be a whole series of documents between that, NDTs, X-rays, ultrasound, stuff like that. Quality management plan. Well, I've got a quality management plan and a quality management system. People tend to use those interchangeable. In my world, they're not. So a project management plan is something specific, is a plan specific for that project. Yeah. The quality management system is the quality system the company uses. Yeah. So it's very high level, and it's got some very good stuff in it around how they check. And indeed, one of those checks might be, where did we get the steel from, and is it buildable? So that might be so some of these come from the will be delivered with the steel, either from the supplier or the fabricator. Often it's a combination of both. Yeah. So this is where you again come back in. if you do, does anybody do any construction monitoring on site? You do, so you'll be interested in this bit. So this is where you come back in. So then you carry on doing your construction monitoring at whatever level it is, construction monitoring 2, 3, 4, whatever. The steel arrives on site. You've now got to determine from the construction category what documentation you're expecting to see. Yep. You then take that documentation and you go, yep, I'm happy with that, I'm happy with that, that all meets compliance. Attach it to your reports, sign it off, done. Council inspector comes along, yep, I see the stills going up, yep, look, I've checked all the documentation, it's attached to the report, we're all good to go. Yep. So, and that documentation, as I said, will take the form of manufacturer's data report, delivery notes. It could, if it's got circular hollow sections, we might ask for the fabricator's factory production certificate, but all that will be spelled out in the Form 5. So you'll know exactly what we're not asking you to go into that quality role, we're asking you to do a check of requested documents. Yep. So that's what the report might look like, your MDR. So your MDR contains a hell of a lot of material. Yep. Again, it will be all or some of this. So again, you could, we'll tick off what we need. You'll see what we need here. So this is what the process looks for. So you understand what the council are looking for. Yeah. They're not going to check. Yes, you write PS2. Got any PS2 authors? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you write your PS2, and you're cool. That's good. But it still goes to our structural engineering team because they'll do some audit. Yep. And one of the audits they'll do along with the processor is they'll do a search on your structural steel specification. And they'll search for 5131. Is it in there? Oh yeah, you specified it. Tick that box. Right. Have you specified the construction category? Yep, tick that box. Have you specified an inspection test plan? Oh yep, you specified it. You're not producing one, you're specifying it as designers. Tick that box. That's it. That's your design approved from the aspects of complying with the requirement to demonstrate compliance to 5131. Just those three simple little actions. Nothing complicated. Yep.
Do we just cover that on the specification or it should be covered on the drawings as well?
Either or. It depends on the size of the project. Very often if it's in the specification, that's good enough. Yep. Sometimes for a smaller building, you just have a set of notes at the start of your structural drawings. Put it in there. As long as we can find, as long as it's clear that the constructor has to provide the steel to 5131.
So as long as it's in the documentation, either on the drawing or specification, Auckland Council is happy with that?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So why have we done all this? Well, I explained at the beginning, excuse me. I explained at the beginning the whole concept of 5131. It was about trying to control the quality of steel and fabrication that was being imported. Yeah? It's not to say that that steel isn't any good, all right? It's allowing us to trade better, take advantage of international markets, encourage overseas investment. Of course, yeah, if you're building a $300–400 million hotel, wouldn't you want to spend that money, some of that money in your own country? Of course you would, it's natural. So Auckland Council have got a responsibility to the Greater Auckland people and to New Zealand in general. So part of that is to how can we facilitate this? So we came up and wrote 5131 basically. That got approved. We then got it into the code, and then we built these processes, if you like, on how to deliver the intent. And the intent is to demonstrate that the steel is manufactured and fabricated to the standards that you've selected. Yep. Some of the challenges have been, we've got a, I guess you'd call it a giant tent, but it's a structural steel and it's got a big fabric cover over it. It's coming in. It's basically a demountable sorting shed for the rubbish, cleanups and what have you. And that's been manufactured in Canada to ASNI, yeah, AANSI, yep. So how are we going to make that one fit? So we've got pathways to do all that. We can do it, yeah. So its intention is to address the quality of the steel. So note that wording, that's very carefully worded. Demonstrate compliance to steel grade and type as specified on the drawings. Everybody uses 3404. There's nothing in the New Zealand Building Code says you've got to use 3404. Nothing. We just use it because it's convenient. Yep. And everybody knows it, everybody designs to it, everybody understands it. Manufacturer, right? So demonstrate compliance to grade and dimension of rolled sections, yeah, as specified on the drawing. So by manufacturer, I mean the smaller rolled steel, hot rolled joists. Sometimes they're cold rolled, but mainly hot rolled. And your little profiles, yeah? Your angles, your C-sections, that kind of thing. Fabrication of the beams that are fabricated up. We've all seen them flat plate, welded up into big I-beams. We've all seen that. What 5131 doesn't demonstrate, and this is why it's not a major concern for oh no, there you go. So congratulations, you now know all you need to produce a document to comply with 5131. That was quick, wasn't it? Congratulations. Any questions?
Yeah, with the construction category 3,
yeah.
I think it said that you needed all the documentation prior to consent. How does that work if you've got a traditional contract and you go to tender at the same time, just building consent? Yeah. Don't necessarily do supply chain.
So what we can do.
Do you mind repeating the question for the video?
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah. So the question there is, and this is a very common problem. So the question is, how do we demonstrate compliance and the document as by providing the documentation if it's a construction category 3 building before consent if the tender hasn't gone out yet and we don't know who the supplier is or the fabricator. So there's two ways you can deal with this. Nothing you do or nothing you put into a consent is carved in stone. It can all be changed. We have processes for managing that change. So you have one or two choices. You say, right, I'm going to buy the steel from Steel is Us, who has all the QMS and factory productions and has third-party accreditation that they can produce steel to New Zealand standard. And I'm going to have it fabricated by Fabricators Are Us, who have got an SCNZ CC4 accreditation. And we'll go, fine, that's the promise you've made. Then if you want to change that, we manage that change. Alternatively, we would like the industry to think about changing its contract model, because consenting is going to go more and more risk-based over the years. It has to. At the moment, it's non-specific, it's not prescriptive, and there's too many anomalies in it. So we've got to go risk-based. That's the only way we're going to go. And MB currently are working through 5 areas on the Building Act, and one of those areas is around how do you develop a risk-based consenting process. I would argue, from a personal point of view, that to develop a real good understanding of your project from a risk perspective, you would need the design and the contractor on board. So I'm looking forward to the day when the sequence is design, yeah, contractor engagement, material sourced, now let's go for a consent. yeah, rather than this model we've got at the moment, which is rush to consent. And I understand why, because that's how the finances are set up, and there's all kinds of other external pressures. All I'm saying is we're encouraging industry to maybe look at the way they do business. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Yeah. If the other thing you can do is work through it, like again for the some of the stuff like Westfield, yeah. When we started their contracting, when they started their contract, they didn't really have their suppliers fixed in. So we said, well, okay, you're obviously tendering it, so you will have a tendering or a financial process as well as a quality management plan. You'll have a finance management plan. What does your plan say? Does it say you've got to go to 3 tenderers? Well, if it does, why don't you get all 3 tenderers approved? You can make a statement. The supply will be one of these 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. But the answer is come and talk to council first. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just as an engineer, because we are doing the design, so we are responsible to show the construction category on our specification or drawing. But when it goes to the construction for the issuing the PS4, what's our responsibility in terms of the the construction category? Do we need to take some actions during the shop drawing review, or is it just as long as it complies the fabricator?
Okay, so what, if I understand the question correctly, we're saying what's the designer's role after the construction starts,
or
and how
structural engineering do the inspection or issue the
structural engineering doing inspection. The answer is no. So the responsibility is whoever is doing the construction monitoring. So we would look at when the consent comes in, we look at it, and you've determined that it's construction category 2, for example, right? The constructor then goes to 5131, looks under table D1, and then there's a list of documents required under construction category 2. They are responsible for providing those documents. Whoever does the construction monitoring is responsible for them being delivered being checked on site, goes on their report, and then eventually goes on to the PS4 as part of the closeout. Yep.
So when you say checked on site,
yeah.
What?
Did a document? Sorry?
Just that they exist, or how? Like, are we supposed to check that the steel fabricator is accredited, like it says it is?
Okay, so it depends on the level of documentation required. So, but as a minimum, you're going to look at the delivery notes to make sure they've come from the mill that's specified. Yeah. You're going to look at the fabricator's QMS to make sure the ITP's been signed off, and all the dimensional checks have been done and everything else. Yeah. So there's a without overcomplicating it, for the majority of the buildings that we see around Auckland, it's construction category 2, yeah? So there's not a great deal of documents. It's basically an MDR, manufacturer's data report, that you get when the steel turns up. So just make sure that that's there, basically. Mill certificates, make sure they're there. And make sure the mill is what was, and the delivery notes all line up. So it's not so much knowing about steel, it's just really being able to read, yeah? And then just line it up. So, does council approve the mills? No, but there are accredited mills. So, we look in New Zealand, we recognise JASANS, which is the Joint Australian-New Zealand Standards, yeah? And one of their accreditors is ACRE. So, if you've got a steel mill that's got a current ACRE certification, and that demonstrates to us that steel is to New Zealand standard. And that's the problem with a lot of the Southeast Asian steel mills. The market in New Zealand is so small that there's been no need for them in the past to get accreditation. It's not that the steel's no good, it's just just not worth the money to them. But now, with markets closing, New Zealand's suddenly become favourable. So we have to find a way of accommodating it. Yeah, so that's the simplest way. Yep. Did I answer your question?
So what happens if the mills aren't accredited to those people?
So if they're not accredited to acres, then we can have an independent third-party review. So a lot of mills use people like Bureau Veritas or people like that. So they will go and do a audit to see what standards their steel's to.
And that will be, council will have looked at that before construction starts.
Well, the constructor will have looked at it and provided the documentation, yes. Yeah. Yes.
I understand the construction engineers define the construction categories, but who's responsible to define the welding requirement? Testing requirement, like on the 5131 appendix I, there's a table like requires a percentage of ultrasound testing, those kind of things.
No, sorry, I didn't understand that. What is it you're saying?
So who defines the percentage of testing?
That's their QMS. So 5131, yeah, it talks about the testing policies and the testing regimes, and whether it's a what's the word, type test, yeah, or so whether it's a type test or material specific, or everything gets tested. It's the manufacturer's quality management system that determines that.
So engineer just provide the construction kit.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. That's all you've got to do. All you've got to do is say, I've designed this complies with, it's to comply with 50, so you nominate it complies with 5131, just like you do at the moment. Everybody puts in 3404, yeah? So you put in 5131, add a construction category of 2, yeah? And then sometimes we ask you to explain how you've got that. So put your determination thoughts in. So say, I'll go back to them, I can't remember what they all are now off the top of my head. Yeah, so it's importance level, service category, fabrication category. So once you've determined those 3, that determines your cost, your construction category. That's you done as designers. That's you finished. This gentleman first, yeah? Okay, thank you.
Just a question regarding the construction categories.
Yeah.
You mentioned that bridges are construction category 4.
Yep.
It's on this slide here, it's talking about road and rail bridges with fracture critical components.
Correct, yeah.
So does that cover all bridges and, like, I guess secondary steel work? Like
Pretty much, yeah.
Rails,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, pretty much, yeah, yeah. Be very unlikely not to be.
The question is about the construction and fabrication category. If during if the assumption with the design engineer was that it's CC2 and based on the construction category and based on the fabrication category, and during the construction they have changed the fabrication category, for example, from the shop weld they come to the site welding and those stuff. Whose responsibility is to raise the question or to raise?
Okay, so questions around if the construction category changes?
Yeah.
So it's whoever owns the consent is responsible for managing change. So that's not just limited to the construction category. If there's any change on the consented documentation, then that has to be managed by the applicant. So they're responsible.
So
They come back to council.
PS4 author is not responsible for that one?
No. It goes. What you do is you go. The typical way it would work is that it'd have to be quite a major change in design. So you'd go to the inspector, assuming the work's already started, and you'd say, "Look, we've changed this design so drastically. We think the construction category's moved up." All right. So then you'd put a formal amendment request in, discuss it with our structural engineers, and they would either agree, and then you'd have to do what you need to do, which is really just provide some more documents. It's not a redesign from such, because you've already done that, yeah?
But there is no responsibility for
No,
for
no. It's like any other change. Yeah.
But if there is a change in the drawing from the construction, they have amendment from, it's a major change, we have to go back to the design engineer, and if it's really a major change, we need to have that one peer reviewed, and PS4 author is responsible to pick those changes on site. But for this instance, it's not PS4 author responsible.
No, because what happens is, if you change the construction category, all that changes is the type of documentation. Yeah, so that would be checked by the construction monitor. So all we'll do is say, instead of needing these 3 documents, you need these other 2 sets of documents as well. Yeah, so it's a quality control chain management. Yeah. Somebody had a question about that. Okay, so I think you'll find that your best thing to do is get yourself familiar with 5131 and particularly table D1, because in there, see, the thing about standards are they have to come from a position of neutrality, all right? And what they mean by that is they can tell you what you need to do, but not how to do it. So they won't, that D1 table won't specifically say mill certificates. It will say things like quality control assurance for steel manufacture. And you go, well, how do I do that? Well, I do that with mill certs, yeah? So it's a little bit awkward, and the language used is very non-prescriptive. So I would recommend you get your head around it, and then going back to your specific question, which was around documentations for a simple building, CC1, you'll find that there's very few documentations required. I would suggest that if the constructor is not getting those documents, they shouldn't be building, because they're like any other quality control document that they should need. Yeah, they're not asked, particularly at that level, they're not asking for anything different. Yeah. Sorry, this gentleman was first, I think.
Your green, amber, and red system you have there, do you know if other TAs around the country are operating on a similar basis?
So we took this on the road with SCNZ, and we were kind of world famous in New Zealand on our road tour. And COVID-19 hit us. So we've got a few more to go to. But I do know that both in Wellington and Christchurch that we managed to go and see, they had 2 major hotels, 2 major buildings where they couldn't demonstrate compliance to the steel. And the Novotel in Christchurch, I think? Yeah, Christchurch. It's only now, 4 years after it's built, being opened. So everybody's learnt a lesson. There was a big article done by Phil, what's his name? Pennington. Yeah, well done, Pennington. And it's called City to City or something, and it was an article on how Auckland Council were dealing with demonstrating compliance to steel and how Wellington had done. I shouldn't gloat because they're fellow council workers, but we were brilliant. So I forgot what the question was. Where were we?
No.
Oh, yeah, similar, yeah. So, and we're talking to them all the time, yeah. In fact, what we're seeing more and more is some of our stuff being used quite a lot, yeah. Anybody else? Oh, hands everywhere. This one there.
Between, say, CC2 or CC3 and CC4, I presume because of the extra quality assurance processes, it adds cost to the fabrication? Or how does that reflect?
So first of all, cost. We're talking about costs, yeah. it's legislative, so we don't care about costs.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you manage that is the industry's concern. What I would say from all my experience in the field, it shouldn't. If a fabricator says this is going to cost you extra, then I'd look for another fabricator. They should have a QMS that just bounces these documents out. Yeah, it should be like breathing to them. If they've got to do something special, it would be a big red flag to me. I'd be saying, whoa, no, these fabricators aren't all jacked up to what they should be. Their QMS should be sound. Yeah, you should be able to go to them and say, I want an ITP, I want an MDR, and they'll go, yep, it just flows out. Yeah.
Sorry, going up 2 more questions.
If we're only specifying the construction category, and then the contract is required to specify the amount of weld testing that's required, but then we come to construction monitoring, all the steel is being fabricated, and for us to sign PS4, we may not agree in terms of the amount of testing that's being carried out.
Mm-hmm.
What's the compliance process then? Because the contractors may be responsible for it, but they may not have interpreted the same way as the person who's got to sign the PS4.
Okay, so again, what we're talking about here really is if the NDT is not sufficient to the construction monitoring engineer. All right. So look, things are going to happen, and that might well be one of them. Whenever 2 different people read the same thing, there's always 2 interpretations. Yeah. You would need to resolve that from a contractual and technical point of view. So if it was me, if I was doing the construction monitoring and I thought there wasn't enough NDT being done, I'd say, okay, where have you got this NDT method from? And if they say, oh, it's because the council approved the consent, I'd say, well, that's not a reason, because that's not demonstrating compliance, is it? And if they say, we've complied to the consent, rubbish, that's not the requirement. Yes, the Building Act requires you to comply with the consented drawings and documents. The Building Act also requires you to comply with 5131. So if 5131 says 10 in 100, and they're doing 5 in 100, because somehow it's got through the consenting process, then 5131 takes precedence. And you stand on that, and they have to go away and do it. That's how I would approach it. But, you know, we're all different. Some people, you know.
So it falls back to the contractor unless the person providing the PS4 has unreasonable requirements, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And as long as they've got something they can stand on, yeah. Was there anybody? I think this gentleman here had a question. He kept putting his hand up.
I just want to ask, going back to this on simple lintels, what happens if the manufacturer is not approved by whatever authority and some places in China and no one can verify?
Yep, so we work through that, and we have different levels of how to demonstrate compliance. So what I call right over here on the left at the beginning, if it's a simple building and you've stated that it's all going to come from an acres mill and it's all going to be manufactured by a SCNZ fabricator, fine, right? Or if you've said, look, this bit's going to be done by acres, but I've got circular hollow sections, they're coming from a mill in China, it's not certified, what do we do? And then we talk and we work out a mutual compliance path. Yep.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Thank you all very much. I didn't expect such a big audience, so I'm going to get big-headed now, so thank you. At the top there, I've left some business cards on the right-hand side. Feel free to take them. There's only about 20, but feel free to take them. If you think of anything, if you've got any questions, look, give me a call. If you don't manage to grab a card and you need to get hold of me, I assume everyone's got Kingsley's number? So you're going to put my... So grab a card anyway if you want, but my name's going to go up in lights apparently. So if you get any questions or you want to discuss it further, then feel free. But once again, thank you all for your time. Thank you.